The Waters and Stanton video channel is devoted to ham radio topics, including equipment and techniques. It is hosted by Peter Waters, G3OJV.
Well, hello and welcome once again to the Waters and Stanton video channel. If you're new to this channel, then you're very welcome. If you're a regular, well, thank you for your support. And don't forget to press the subscribe button, because that will alert you to videos as we publish them. Now, this channel is run by Waters and Stanton, and we're one of the largest UK retailers of ham radio, and been around for quite a long time. I've personally been licensed since 1960, and the company was first started in 1973. I was recently asked to give a talk on ham radio, and the question of CB arose. Now that's quite interesting actually, because CB has been around for a long time as well. But I can go back to the early days when I was first licensed, 1960, and I knew about CB because I'd seen it in the QST magazine, mentioned the QST magazine in America. CB was quite popular in America, and I know a lot of people over here were envious because in the 1960s, to get an amateur radio license, you had to do a City and Guilds examination. It was, well, I wouldn't say it's a high standard, but it did need some study and so forth. And you had to do a 12 word per minute Morse test. And if you got both of those, you got your license. And the attraction of CB, of course, was that you could get a radio and chat to your friends without the need for a license. Well, I know that there was a lot of pressure on the government over the years in the 1960s and so forth to try and persuade them to grant a CB license or CB band, and it was resisted for a long time, and I think a lot of people thought they were just banging their heads against a brick wall. But eventually the government caved in, and the 27 megahertz CB band was born in the UK and in other parts of Europe, and in many respects it replicated what was going on in the USA. And we started to sell CB equipment and also CB antennas, and of course we were a regular advertiser in Radcom, or as it was in those days, Bulletin. But we were surprised to find that we weren't allowed to advertise CB equipment or antennas in the RSGB Bulletin. That's right, we weren't allowed. And I can remember on several occasions trying to slip in a few CB antennas and being contacted by the RSGB and saying that you cannot advertise CB in the Bulletin, and if you do, then we won't allow you to advertise. And on several occasions I had a phone call saying, look, you've got CB mentioned again, pull that or we pull your advert. Now, how biased was that? But of course we are going back a long time. Things fortunately have changed. But, you know, there is still a lot of bias and a lot of polarised feelings about CB. I know on many occasions I've heard ham radio operators talking about CB as if it was something different. You know, it was the operators in using CB were inferior and so forth. I know the jargon is different because a lot of that jargon was taken from the American operators, but you can't criticise somebody if you don't like the jargon they use. If it's not inflammatory, so what? So there is this polarisation of feelings in certain parts of the ham radio field. Now, you know, I think that ham radio really has got an awful lot to thank the CB operators for. You see, many ham radio operators of today were CB operators, and some are still CB operators. They started in CB, and the reason they started in CB was because it was easy to get a radio. You didn't need a license, and to be honest, the equipment wasn't overly expensive, and you got an aerial and you could chat to people. Now, when I was a shortwave listener, I had to go into London to Lisle Street or Praed Street or Edgware Road and purchase some ex-government equipment and play around with it, try and get it working. And yes, I was a pirate. I was a pirate for a few months because I needed to get on the air. I suppose in those days the pirates were perhaps better, a bit more I want to say more experience. Pirates in those days, before I was licensed, operated CW, because with CW they couldn't recognise your voice. They didn't know whether you're a pirate or not. So for a few months I was a pirate before I got my ham radio licence.
Well, well, well. Caught you.
Well, Peter didn't get put in prison. In fact, he just had a few local CW contacts with his teenage mates, all of whom went on to become G3s.
Anyway, what I'm saying is that those that want to get into radio, they want to get into radio as quickly as they can. Now, I can understand people going to the local club and studying for their basic ham radio license, and it's not too difficult. But there are those that just want to get their hands on a radio. And the interesting thing is that very often the CB operators who originally bought their CB because their mates had got CB and they wanted to chat, some of those suddenly think, wait a minute, I like this, not simply for chatting, but I'm interested in how it all works. I'm interested in how far I can talk. And I know jolly well now that 27 megahertz is great for local chats, and sometimes the band opens, but I know on ham radio I can work much greater distances on a more regular basis. Now, me talking about it is not going to change the attitude of some in the ham radio hobby. That's the way of life. But I think it's nice to actually air the situation, talk about the situation, and, well, give you my feelings. So where do we go from here? Well, I just wonder why CB is not really perhaps covered in Radcom. Now, shock horrors. I know there'll be a lot of people saying we don't want CB in the Radcom magazine. We don't want CB. It's a ham radio magazine. Well, yes, it is. But you know, are you doing yourself a disservice by not covering CB? Because if CB operators or some of the CB operators are tomorrow's hams, why don't we cover it in Radcom? Now, I've got no control over Radcom. I've only got a view, and I know a lot of you will think, well, you're talking a lot of rubbish, Peter. It's a ham radio magazine. We don't want CB in there. Well, I would venture to suggest that perhaps Radcom should be looked upon as a hobby radio magazine and broaden its coverage to encourage CB operators. That's my view. Some will agree and some won't agree. But anyway, what I really believe is that CB and ham radio should be living together and be closer together than they perhaps are in some areas. I think that if my grandson was a CB operator, I'd be delighted, because I think he may become interested in ham radio. As it happens, I don't think he is going to be interested in radio, but there we are. That's life, isn't it? So a very short video on my views on CB and amateur radio. We as a company sell ham radio, we sell CB, we sell Midland CB, and we're proud to do that because we know that some of those CB operators will become hams and hopefully will buy their ham radio from us. So there we are. A very short video. I'll get off my little pedestal now and go back and do some work. But thank you for watching this video. I hope I'm sure it'll provoke some views, and I'm sure they'll be polarised. And well, it's interesting to get views anyway.
If you are a CB operator watching this video, or indeed anybody interested in obtaining a ham radio license, we recommend you contact the Radio Society of Great Britain, who will provide all the information you need. It's easy to get started and it's a great hobby. Contact details are below this video.
So, thank you for watching this video. Great that you've tuned into this channel, and I hope you've stayed to the end. Perhaps you haven't, perhaps you've switched off, in which case you won't be listening to this bit. But new videos to come up shortly. Take care, enjoy your ham radio, enjoy your CB. Speak soon.
Remember, at Waters and Stanton we carry all the major brands. Check our website or give us a call on 01702 206835.